Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. We count down to the 20th death anniversary of Mrs Indira Gandhi. My guest today worked closely with the former Prime Minister for more than 30 years and was described by Mary Seton, a famous writer, as perhaps the closest and the best friend she could have. I'm delighted to welcome Usha Bhagat. Usha ji, sort of 20 years ago, Mrs Gandhi passed away. On that morning, what was your first response, your first emotion, your feeling that someone you had known so well for so long had died so brutally?
You see, there was no time to think at that time because I was at home. Actually, when I got a message, not about the death, I got a message that TV program is being done there, and then it is going to continue in her South Block office. And Mrs Gandhi has sent a message that I should go there to see that her room and everything is arranged. So I came to the South Block or Prime Minister's office with that in mind, and there I heard that some shooting has taken place, but what I understood was that some maybe attempt has been made. So I rushed there, and I found Mr. Shada Prasad on telephone trying to inform Rajiv in West Bengal, who was on touring, and Mrs. Jaikar and Natwar Singh standing in stony silence. And that's for the first time that I heard not exactly what has happened, but this thing has happened, and that she was in AIM, a medical institute. So then I rushed there. So what I'm trying to explain, that there was no time to think,
to respond emotionally to what had happened,
because you were involved in so many things. And it was unbelievable, the whole thing, that it took some time and some days for it to gradually sort of sink in.
But you've had a long association. You're working on a kind of memoir of your association with with Mrs Gandhi. What is the sort of the dominant aspect of her personality that comes up? If I were to sort of never have met you or not know of your background or not know of Mrs Gandhi and said, well, you were working for this this great woman, Prime Minister of India, what was she like? What would be your sort of first description of her?
Well, firstly to tell you that when I started to work with her in the mid-50s, she was nowhere near becoming a Prime Minister. And if I had known, perhaps I don't know if I would have joined her also, because I was never interested in power as such. It was her father who was a Prime Minister, and she was really her official hostess, and along with that she was involved in certain welfare organizations, but not directly in the political aspects. Of course, she was the eyes and ears of her father in that sense, and she knew all the political personalities, but she was not in, it was only later that she came in the Congress Working Committee and directly involved in the politics herself.
You write often about how reticent she was to enter the political process and to assume, sort of the decisive moment perhaps was when she became president of the Congress Party.
Yes, that also I think it is not that she went where the Congress session was being held in Nagpur. I don't think the idea of becoming that, but I think the pressure of the various personalities sort of I think made her that, and I'm sure that she must have done it with great reluctance, but she also must have found it difficult to completely deny not being there. And so when you asked me this question about her, the Prime Minister, that's so my this whole thing has been changing gradually as she was moving from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3.
Okay, let's take it phase by phase. So in this early phase, we have the Prime Minister's daughter that you go and you work for.
When I work for her,
and you enter the Prime Minister's house, and you write about how it wasn't sort of as embellished and decorated as one might imagine, and it was almost like a well-furnished CPBW bungalow.
Well, I must say I was quite taken aback, because when you saw the imposing building outside, and when you'd heard about the Prime Ministers, you imagined it to be some very magnificent, opulent kind of a thing. It was really very stark and simple, and as I said, a little more like a better class circuit house or whatever it is. Maybe it's too strong a term, but whatever it is. And so the simplicity, and not only the simplicity of the house, But you see, both Panditji and Mrs Gandhi, they were basically a very their whole I mean, intellectually they were what they were, but their whole style of living, because having Panditji gone through prison and living that life, although during his father's time they had that opulence, but there was a great simplicity around in the house and in the living. And that is how when I entered, it was like that. It was gradually, and then she was also a mother of young boys, so that also occupied her time. And then the entertainment, official entertainment. So she was a very devoted daughter and devoted mother at that time.
So what was your perception in this phase one of her as a human being?
Well, phase one was sort of she was a shy person, although she could talk quite a lot. And she could talk quite a lot, but I have a feeling that somewhere at the back of her mind, she was watching and forming her own opinions and whatnot, but she didn't come out with the innermost feelings. But otherwise, she was very, she could be very sociable also. But I also was shy, I am afraid to say so. I also kept my distance. And it's over a gradually period of time that I think we came to know each other better. So that was, as I said, phase one.
A great deal have been written about the complexity of Mrs. Gandhi's personality, her difficult childhood, father in jail in the turbulence of the independence movement, the difficulty, the complexity of her relationship with her husband, and the nuances of that. How complex and how did you perceive her in that sense?
You see, basically, I think she was quite a complex person or personality herself, and of course, it was accentuated by her childhood, which must have been a very difficult childhood, because the father was all the time in and out of prison, or in the moments, mother either in jail or suffering with her illness. She was very unwell, and and lot of movement, political movement going in and out. So she was left firstly to herself to fend not only for herself, but even things around, and also the traumas were there. So and being a very sensitive child, a sensitive person, I think it really did affect her a lot, and she was not sort of very communicative. So I think she internalized it a lot. And that also made her quite a complex person, and not communicating, and also keeping her sort of hurts and all the things within herself. And that, so she was really, I found over a period of time, a very complex person. She could be she could be very sort of harsh, or very tough and very vulnerable, a very gentle and concerned person, and sort of a harsh, as I said, and she could be very perceptive, and I mean she had many shades to herself.
So give us an example of the gentle nature of her that many of us intuited, but certainly in terms of the political analysis, she was described as the only man in the cabinet, and things like that. So there was obviously this very important aspect of her life. A woman of enormous erudition, culture, good taste, sensitive in human relationships. You were so close to her.
Yes, she was. Even from her childhood, firstly, she was extremely fond of reading. She always said the books were really her best companion. I think even when she was lonely and in childhood, she was very fond of reading, and books had to surround her. Even till the end, when she was a prime minister, even when she went out for 2 days, she had to have books. So that is one thing, that the books kept her very much in touch with the literature of the world, the knowledge and everything. Along with that, her sensitivity was, she had a very sort of aesthetic streak in her, which I think the father also had, and it was not in any kind of a sort of a very what do you say, lavish, and that's it was, as I mentioned in my book, I somehow think that it was like the Japanese art, which is not seen so much above, but there's a great depth. And I think she had that kind of a streak, it was she responded to nature.
You've written about how at the Simla summit that one would have imagined that there was this whole focus on the political process and the preparation for this, and here was the Prime Minister attending to detail and getting writing pads and stationery flying out from Delhi.
Yes, because she had many different kind of qualities. I mean, this observation, neatness, and again I said not in a lavish style, but when we arrived in Shimla, she wanted to go and see where Mr. Bhutto was to stay, and the Chief Minister took her there, and of course they had done whatever best they could do, but obviously it was a government accommodation and government kind of thing, and so she was most dissatisfied. There was not much could be done, but she with my sort of involved me into it, and whatever best we could do, and spent many hours. And then when she found that the stationery was not there, and then she made me ring up Rashtrapati Bhavan in Delhi and say, please overnight certain things arrive. I hope Mr. Bhutto and his daughter realized how much effort she had gone into the thing.
During that phase we were just talking about.
Excuse me, I just want to slightly interrupt you. When you say close associate, well, I will not term that myself, because I don't think she was a person, I don't think anybody was a close associate as such. I will not term myself as that.
So how would you describe your relationship with her?
I worked very closely with her, no doubt, and I understood her to some extent, but even now I will not be able to say, I don't think anyone will be able to say that they or he or she understood her completely. So I can't say that even at this stage. That's what I'm just trying to correct you by saying that I will not term myself as close associate. I worked with her closely. that is how it's better to put it.
In your close working with her, there was both sort of the personal. You weren't really involved in the higher sort of levels of the political interaction, but you had a sense of what was going on. So let's stay with the personal for a while. You watched her closely as a mother. What kind of mother was she?
You see, when in the younger days, I mean, although she was fully occupied, and what I found was that, and she used to say, she says, to be a good mother doesn't mean spending a lot of time. And she says, what do a lot of these mothers who don't work, but who are spending time playing bridge or other kind of activities? She says it's the quality of time and not the quantity of time which is important. So even if you spend limited time or whatever time, but you give yourself fully, and that makes much more of an important, and I think that was an important point. And she maintained that. So whenever she would come from tours and the children were young, she would spend a lot of time with them, telling stories or doing things together.
So what was your response to your perception, your feelings about Rajiv and Sanjay, young boys, one to be a future Prime Minister and one who would have been Prime Minister perhaps?
No, as I told you earlier on when I joined, even her Prime Ministership was nowhere in view. So question of the boys coming into that thing was absolutely out of question. So I mean,
but you watched them grow up, and
no, I watched them grow up, and but I don't think that they were directly involved in the political happenings.
Did you get a sense that they were being groomed for Prime Ministership?
No, not at all. Even when they talk about Mrs Gandhi, that Panditji groomed her, I somehow never got that impression, and I still do not believe in that, but that's my view. It doesn't have to be others. But I don't think that Panditji, of course he was a lonely person, and so she was great help to him in many ways, and that kind of togetherness and companionship was there, but I don't think it was being done with the idea of grooming her to become the Prime Minister. I read somewhere in one or two books also, people whom I respect, that he was, I won't say unhappy, but he kept himself aloof from the decision of her becoming the Congress President also. But then he was a Democrat. So he didn't want to sort of again impose his views on her.
When did you feel this reticence of her involvement in politics may have somewhat retreated? She was even reticent when you've written of when she became Mr. Shastri's Minister of Information and Broadcasting. So was it after Mr. Shastri's death and when the political machination started? When do you think that reticence may have?
I think it really would be when she became the Prime Minister herself. Again, she didn't sort of maneuver to become the Prime Minister, as you know that how she became made the Prime Minister by all these the so-called stalwarts. And but once she stepped into that, I think then I think from then onward, I think she realized that now, I mean, it is what she has to prove herself. So I would say that really speaking from then onward, I don't think before that she was aiming or trying to move towards politics or get power. That's my view, at least.
Someone who was so complex and shy, did you ever get a sense of self-doubt after she became Prime Minister and the processes of Prime Ministership and the affirmation of power began to unfurl itself?
You see, she was not a person who would talk, or her ideas, her views, her personal doubts, etc., to anybody. So nobody would know. I mean, she maybe later on she may have done to her children when they grew up, but I doubt very much. But I do not think so. Although, if you ask my opinion, you see, once she has taken a step, then she has to prove and to make the best of that. So that is how I would.
If the Bangladesh War was sort of, in a sense, the defining moment of sort of a success, and the way we look back at Mrs. Gandhi, the emergency was the blot, and you have said that Mrs. Gandhi's when she followed her instincts was when she really went wrong, and this may have been one case where she didn't follow her instincts.
Yes, I mean, this is not only to do with that, but I felt on the whole that she had very heightened instincts and intuition, and a very sharp one, and so I mean, that's again my view, that I feel that whenever she followed those, she rarely went wrong. But when she allowed those to be clouded by different factors, then things could falter, and then she did falter at this moments like that. And but I wish that she had really only been guided by her own instincts, but it's a very difficult thing. It was a very difficult period. You have to understand. It's easy to sit back and talk, but it was a very difficult moment, and you have to not rely, but to listen to a lot of opinions. But that's all I can say, because I was not personally involved in those things.
But you have recorded a conversation she had with Mr. Siddharth Shankar Ray, who she was close to.
No, it was not. It was not my. That is from a book I've taken. It's directly. It's not a direct kind of.
But what did she say, and what did it?
I think what you're referring to perhaps is that he also was one of those who persuaded her for the declaration of emergency, and what I have perhaps said is that earlier on, when her father wanted to step out from the prime ministership, I think 1958, she was not happy, and she wrote him a letter, which has appeared in the book, and I'm quoting in my book also. So I have felt that at that time when he persuaded her, then she did not think of the advice that she gave to her father of stepping aside. So this is just my own conjecture or my view, but I think I'm too small and insignificant a person to realize the magnitude of the problem which was ahead of her.
Post-emergency, there was an election and Mrs. Gandhi was no longer in power. You have also sort of written about how depressed and low she was at that point, and that in fact if she hadn't been arrested, she may not have come back into active politics.
Again, these are all my views. I don't know how correct they are, but she was no doubt depressed, and I think there was a kind of feeling which, she had always loved the mountains, and somehow all during this turmoil of her political life, she couldn't, and the nature, so maybe at the back of her mind she felt maybe this is the best time now to go to to live in the mountains and the nature. But the government in power at that time, you know, after her, and by putting her in jail, I think they, you know, she was a person, if sort of you pushed her to the wall, I mean, what came out of her at that time was something quite different. So they challenged her. You know, when you challenge her, then her Shakti or whatever it is came out, and then said, okay. So that is how it was. I mean, many times it was, I think it happened because sort of if you crossed her path or challenged her, you know, it brought out sort of this grit and the determination in her. So she was a person, not all the time that, I'm sure she was insecure at certain moments, she faltered, but what I feel is, you know, when you were talking about personality also, that people have personalities, no doubt different people have, but the circumstances and the situations which come in their life and their interaction, you know, that is what shapes the personality further. So, and you know, she, I feel that if the kind of situation had not happened, she may have taken a different path, because she was very, you know, as I said, interested in literature, art, nature, and many times she would perhaps think perhaps to do go in that direction. But at the same time, coming from the Nehrus and from the political thing, her sense of duty, not only to her family but to the nation and to the people, was so strong that, you know, it overrode all those other feelings time and again, and it lasted till the end. I mean, that is even in Orissa, what she said was, last words were also the same. So she died with the kind of the words and the feeling that she had in mind.
You know, we keep describing Mrs. Gandhi as a complex personality, difficult to understand, you know, a great influential prime minister who dramatically impacted India. But what, at a personal level, you worked so closely with her, and obviously something drew you to her. You left, you know, there were 3 interruptions to your formal association with her, and you kept coming back. So what was it that kept drawing you back to Mrs. Gandhi?
You know, she was also, I mean, you know, we had, I think, some things in common also. I think maybe we were perhaps the art and culture and all those, and some other even feeling, responding to certain things, of course, but very different also. But, you know, she was a very concerned, sympathetic and sensitive human being, with all these things, you know, if in her family or anywhere, even otherwise, if you know that one is not well, immediate a letter, a flowers, etc. would go, and the children, and now, for example, you know, I had a mishap in the house. Sort of, you know, some people had come to steal away and gagged. She came, and then she wrote a letter. She came to meet me also, but the next day, because what happened was, why I am telling you this, we were traveling in a plane from Madras to a month or 2 before that thing happened, and I am quite a coward when it comes to physical kind of dangers. So the plane had, you know, I think there's a term called CAT, that is clear air turbulence or something like that. So the plane was going in terrible sort of movement, and I was closed eyes, remembering God, you know. So while I was going down out of the plane, I told Mrs. Gandhi, I said, I'm quite a coward, and you know, this is what happened. After this episode happened, and so she came, and then she wrote a letter. She says, I'm afraid you gave a lie to your whatever you said. You were a very brave person, and all, you know, it's very nice, sweet letter to buck me up. This is a personal thing, but I know that in many cases, you know, she would it was not even necessary. She was touched or something, you know, she would communicate in many ways, and also she kept up with all her, you know, the busy kind of program. Her family, her friends, even her school friends from Switzerland or somebody, you know, they write, and she would write to them, she would send presents to them, and so she kept up all that
personal relationships,
personal, which was a very big part of hers, but some other, you know, which the other other side started to dominate, and but it didn't wipe out, but it naturally got sort of overcast by those.
So if in one concluding sentence or two you were to remember Mrs. Gandhi, or say, I remember Mrs. Gandhi, what would you say?
In the end, I would only like to say not only what I think, but we have a tendency of either deifying a person, that like a goddess and like that, or we demonize a person, denigrate. This is a general tendency. I looked at her as a human person, and I think she should be looked at as not a superhuman, but a human person who did a superhuman kind of, she had the qualities, but she was very human, and so we should not assess her just by this or that. It is the totality of her personality by which we should try to assess her. That's.
Usha ji, thank you very much. That's been a great learning experience and a great passing.
Not
Thank
at
you.
all. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.